quick, this is Dr. Luepnitz. He said he left at 4:30.
4:30.
Yeah. That's the only lie he's going to tell today.
Enjoy. So the primary, we had a list of questions. What topics, I want to make sure we are respectful of you guys being here. What topics do you want to cover primarily? Yes, ma'am.
What's the best food to eat for the swimmer on the race day? Before, after?
So race day nutrition.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else?
My son is 12, just how to, to grow from, yeah.
Okay.
Snacks. Yeah.
Protein shakes.
Recovery.
All of it.
Hydration.
Hydration, what was the one that brought a chuckle?
Just all of it. I mean, the day-to-day eating, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like what and when to eat.
What and when to eat? Okay.
Yeah, that's
So let's start real quick with a couple of less than theoretical discussions regarding nutrition, just real fast. And that has to do with human anatomy and human physiology, so we're not all going to jump into a variety of theories regarding nutrition. And we may have vegetarians in the room, and meatitarians, and fruitarians, and this is Austin, so there's a lot of tarians I'm not covering. Variety. So it doesn't matter to me if your child's a vegetarian, fruitarian, meatitarian, or anything. First rule is clean. And clean references a long life for your kiddo regarding the fact that they may not be swimmers forever, or maybe they'll swim forever, who knows? As a sport as they get older. I still enjoy swimming a lot. I've just had to adjust strokes just because of shoulders and things of that nature, but it's really a pretty safe sport that your kiddos can do forever and not feel beat up and destroyed. So clean literally means, and remember that it's only been organic produce that's primarily been recalled each of the last 6 years for killing people, not regular produce. When you heard about the cilantro being recalled a couple of years ago, that was organic cilantro that had to be recalled. I'm not anti-organic, I'm just explaining that on mechanized organic farms, the primary irrigation source is human wastewater. And you're dealing with a situation where you have immunocompromised athletes. Now, any of you that think that your kids are immunocompromised, then you're not properly assessing the stress that this type of training places on the system. And we'll get back to the immunocompromised mechanism here in a bit. So it's critical that you wash all your fruits and vegetables for your kiddos, and that means warm water with suds. That doesn't mean sprays or vinegar. The chemist that designed the chemicals that I use in my little vineyard, she's brilliant, and she also knows that that chemical costs $800 an acre to spray. And that's organic. And right on this chemical that I use on my organic grapes, it is designed to bind to the grape in a way that when it rains, it does not come off. If it came off every time it rained, I'd have to respray again. And right now, you get about 4 tons per acre. And a ton runs about $1,200 to $1,500 depending on the grape. So as a part-time farmer, I can tell you that I can't afford to spray that more than once a season. Or I'll make nothing, zeros. So even though that's organic, on the package is skull and crossbones. Which means that if you eat it with that attached to it, you're poisoning your body. Organic means that when it breaks off and it enters into the soil structure, it doesn't create like three-eyed fish and double gull-winged whatevers, and it doesn't kill all of our invertebrates, et cetera, and everything else, because it breaks down and it's biological, biodegradable. It doesn't have anything to do with it poisoning people. Zero. So again, don't hear ever that I'm casting stones or being disrespectful towards the organic market. Zero. Most of the stuff I have in my refrigerator is organic. I'm explaining that doesn't get you out of the loop of having to wash it. It must be washed. That's warm water with suds, and that has to be broken off. Because we want these kiddos not to build up a bunch of these chemicals within their fatty stores, which, not that these kids are fatty, which they're not. The traditional swimmer is going to be relatively lean, which means where they store their fat is going to be in around the uterus for a young lady, through the breast material, and for boys, central trunk weight inside the abdominal wall for these young men. None of those are places where we want any of these chemicals. So the first aspect's clean. That also means on your proteins that thankfully we live in a society now where it's against the law to give hormones to animals that we're utilizing for meat products. What you also know is that the hormones are, even if they're in there, remember we store our testosterone in our muscle, all mammals, and we store our estrogens in our body fat, all mammals. Which means that when you eat another mammal, you're doing the exact same thing, so there's no such thing as hormone-free meat. Mammals store their hormones in their tissue. When you cook the meat, hormones are degradable to heat. So you're not feeding your child hormones. It's not like you're going, well, I'm not gonna give my kid beef because there's hormones in the beef. And that's gonna create problems. If you're cooking your meat, this is all part of clean, then the child's not gonna be exposed to these things. And that's clean. HEB, I'm not touting different companies, I'm explaining because this is Texas and you guys have to source your proteins. HEB sources their beef from 2 primary ranches in South Texas. Of the 2 primary ranches, they get almost every single cow from them. There's no intermediary feedlot. They harvest the cows off the ranches where they either eat grass or hay. Predominantly grass. These are free-range ranches over many thousands of acres each. And the cows are delivered to the processing plant upon which they're killed and packaged. There is no like grain feeding to fatten them or any of that sort of stuff that takes place. So you buy the regular old cow at HEB, you're getting hormone-free, pretty much disease-free because they're not transported large distances. And that's all important. You don't buy your meat at large box stores where the meat could have been shipped from a foreign country and sat on a boat for who knows how long, covering who knows what diseases. That's all part of clean. Chickens now, free range means that you have a large, flat in-house with no dividers in there, there's no cages. And this is almost all chicken producers now, and the chickens run around in there in a barn that if the chicken's this big, the barn roof is only about here. And they all run around in there, and they're all on the floor of the thing, and when the alarm goes off, these things look like water sprinklers, sprinkle out all the food, and they run around pecking anything on the floor that's a different color, if you get my drift. And they eat everything on the ground that's a different color. So there's no such thing as clean chicken. I'm not anti-chicken, there's no such thing as clean chicken. When you as moms and dads, you handle a chicken, you use it with gloves. Well, you're not supposed to handle raw meat without gloves on. You can get in your cuticles, you can get in the cuts on your finger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're transferring buggies to other foods that you're preparing for people. You can't do that to these kids. The reason why you can't do that to these kids is the J-curve of immunity associated with elite athletics. In elite athletics, this is a red blood cell. The red blood cell goes long. These kiddos typically run somewhere between 3.5 to 4.5 for their red blood cell count during practice when they're pushing themselves hard. What occurs on a taper is that the human body has a hierarchical system within the bone marrow, which means red blood cells are produced. Yes, I'm going to talk fast. The red blood cells are produced in a manner upon which, upon a taper, the body determines that it's time to catch up on red blood cells because now they're relaxing for a minute. And immediately the red blood cell count will go up a 0.5 to even a full point. That a half a point increase in red blood cell count is 20 million extra oxygen receptors per drop of blood in your child. That is an enormous benefit to them at competition. As soon as that goes up, unfortunately, white blood cells and most athletes run, if we're lucky, 2.0, if we're lucky, to a full 5. Now, a normal person's going to run a 3.5 to about a 7 or 8. That's not athletes, because athletes are producing reds, not whites, predominantly. And as soon as they go into their taper, this is the J curve that occurs. It goes up above a little bit, off it goes, and this is about 7 to 10 days, this effect. That's the reason why many, many, many athletes train for a major competition. The major competition comes around, the next thing we know, they're sick. They catch a flu, they catch a bug, they come back with a flu or a bug. They don't perform quite as well as they could, they feel puny, all that sort of stuff, and this is a huge issue. So when you guys are traveling No salads. None. Zero.
And
No salads.
what about the vegetarian?
They eat cooked vegetables.
Good.
When you're traveling, there's no such thing as a safe salad at a restaurant. Less than half of all men wash their hands when they poop and pee. Not my stats. And right now, over 30 to 40% of all girls don't wash their hands when they visit the stall.
So,
Not my stats.
one question, please. The
Yes.
chicken, for example, there is many ideas. Some people, they say you have to clean it before cook, and the others.
You always
say-
rinse off your meat. If it's solid meat, like a solid breast, you
Yeah,
always
the
rinse
one
it off
with the
before you
foam,
cook it.
Yeah,
Always.
always what, sorry?
Rinse it.
Rinse it.
I'm talking just plain water.
Yeah, with the plain water.
Solid meat of any cut, you rinse it before you spice it and cook it.
Yeah,
Use butcher paper if you can to spice all your meat on butcher paper. The butcher paper gets thrown away, your gloves go into the butcher paper, the meat's already been put into your pan, and it never gets, nothing that you're going to touch other things with ever touches that meat ever again,
yeah.
until it's cooked. Not that I'm giving you guys lessons on food hygiene, but unfortunately, this has destroyed more than one team that I've worked with.
Yeah, because
We
there's
had
many
one ladies
ideas.
team that visited this town,
Yeah,
that every single athlete on the ladies team ended up with food poisoning from a salad. But they'd heard the lecture, and this is a smart university out in California, in a very nice place, and they're one of the best elite teams, and these are very, very smart people, but they had salads. And the ladies loved their salads, and they all ended up food poisoning from a salad bar. You can't do that when you're immunocompromised. You cannot. No salads when you guys are traveling, when you're going to meets and everything else. You have no control over any of that food. They want to have a banana, you can peel that guy. Yes, ma'am.
So if I'm buying boxed lettuce and my kid eats a salad every day,
You're in control of that.
do
When you're
okay.
traveling, you're not in control of what you get at the local restaurant.
But I don't have to wash that boxed,
Yes.
yes.
You
okay.
take that boxed salad, lettuce leaves, and you put them in a salad spinner, and you still rinse them,
Okay.
at least. With all your solid fruits and broccoli and things of that nature and everything else, you can dunk those in warm water with suds, yes, suds, because it takes suds to break the surface adhesion of those chemicals to knock them off the food, and that's all part of clean.
You say studs, what's the word?
My favorite is camper soap. Camper soap is completely biodegradable, it leaves no residue on the food, it is not harmful to humans, if any of it's left on there, it can't hurt their tummies. That's my favorite forms of soap to use. And there's a variety of companies out there that sell camper soap that you can purchase in small containers to do these things with. Very, very easy. So clean comes back to the J curve of immunity, which we're gonna come back to this because this comes back to race day nutrition. So the second rule for all the athletes is that we wanna make absolutely sure they get as many colors as possible. That's called the free radical theory of accelerated aging associated with elite athletics. And that's the reason why many athletes break down and literally when you do senescence study on their DNA, they age at rates many times accelerated compared to a normal person. And that's because they're pushing their bodies extremely hard, day in and day out and day in and day out. Many of them don't get enough sleep, they don't eat enough food, and they prematurely age their bodies. They create enormous amounts of trash when they're burning all of their chemistry, and the resulting mechanism is they age at a much accelerated rate compared to average people. If you floor your car every time you get it, and you floor it between every single stop sign, your car's not gonna last very long, and that's these kids. So the kids have to have, come on in, guys, if there's seats. There's window seats back there, and I don't think you'll fall in. So what happens with the color is your color then ties into complex, which is the next one, which is you always go with veggies first if you can when it comes to color. Butternut squash, acorn squash, bell peppers, all the different colored bell peppers, carrots, all the wonderful things that you can do. And then the next set of color would be berries, then a kiwi, this is glycemically controlled. Then you would go to your pit or stone fruits, depending on where you guys were raised, and is it called a pit or a stone inside of a peach or a plum or whatever. And then you would go with apple, citrus, all that sort of stuff. And that's hierarchically how you go down the list. And you notice the banana and none of the tropicals are in that list. Grapes aren't in that list because those turn into sugar very, very rapidly, which induces enormous amounts of insulin in the athlete or anybody, which increases then their risk of insulin resistance as they age, And if you do, and you want to read any of the studies of diabetes rates in former athletes, you'll see that it's very ugly. Ugly. You have a maximum exposure to insulin throughout your life, and the more times you're exposed to insulin, how many of you guys are married? You guys know what selective hearing loss is. Well, you've been married for any time whatsoever, it's a real phenomena. And the human body, when it hears the insulin message over and over and over and over and over and over, eventually goes down like, I've heard that message like 900 times, I can't pick my clothes up anymore. They're gonna sit where they are. And that's selective hearing loss. And that happens with insulin. And as you become more and more insulin resistant, the person creates more insulin in response to the exact same carbohydrate, and that doesn't get fixed. And as they age and they go away from their sport, they may have already induced a level of insulin resistance in their body that's setting them up for heart disease, cardiovascular diseases of all types, dementia, Alzheimer's, you name it. Besides weight gain and obesity and all the fun things they get post-exercise.
What else is in the tropicals family?
Mangoes, papayas,
All the good stuff.
all the melons.
Okay.
Now, when do you get to consume the high glycemic fruits? Within 0 to 10 minutes post-exercise. The only time you're allowed to consume high glycemic food is immediately before, during, or after exercise. That's when you have 100% muscle insulin sensitivity in the client. So, I almost said specimen. So this client's a lot nicer. And I don't consider your children to be experimental models, but that is the reason why I'm engaged in athletics. Because your children were experimental models for the main world that I lived in, which was the cancer world, and the thesis which was in accelerated aging of the human mind related to Alzheimer's, dementia, and other types of problems of that nature. So, that's a big problem in athletes. Big. Thank goodness swimmers don't beat their heads against things. So it's less of an issue, but it's a big problem. So in this model, what happens is, this is 0, and this would be 60 minutes. This is insulin sensitivity. How well does the tissue that was worked respond to insulin? You guys hear all this stuff. I want to give you some education related to why you hear what you hear and why you're supposed to do what you do for your kids. Because just like anybody, if we have an understanding of why, we're more apt to make it happen. And that means that at 0 of exercise, meaning you just finished working out, all people have a window where at 15 minutes, the trail off is a 75-degree slope going out to about a 10-degree slope by the time you get to 45 minutes. At 30 minutes, you've already hit the 50% mark, which means if your child eats a taco post-exercise, like a breakfast taco, it's going to take 30 minutes to get out of the tummy and start getting into the bloodstream, which means even if they eat that breakfast taco right here, it's only entering into the bloodstream here, which means half of the muscle fiber is already shut down, they're harboring lactate, and that nutrition will never get into the tissues. That's the reason why your child has to consume a liquid protein, not solid. It must be liquid. It can't be a bar. It could be Jell-O. That turns into a liquid in the tummy. It could be pudding. That turns into a liquid in the tummy. A liquid protein within 0 to 10 minutes post-exercise. You have a child, like many of them that I've worked with, that say, I hate shakes. If you give me another milk-based or another yada-yada shake or a shake of da-da-da-da-da, I will not drink it. But many of these kids will drink Gatorade. Many of these kids will eat Jell-O. I want this to be as practical as possible. That means you go to GNC or you go to the vitamin shop, you buy ISO Pure Unflavored, ISO-P-U-R-E Unflavored, and that's a fractionated whey protein that people that even have a problem digesting milk can digest it. When you stir it into the drink, it goes in just like water. It dissolves completely 100%, but there is no insulin inducer in the ISO Pure Unflavored. It is pure protein. If the child's 130 pounds, they should get somewhere between 20 to 30 grams in that drink. If the child's between 130 and 160 pounds, it goes to 30 to 35. When 60 to 200, I want 35 to 40 grams in that drink. That has to be between 0 to 10 minutes post-exercise, and it must spike insulin. You have to spike insulin in this window. Has anyone here ever had a PET scan? One person. So a PET scan worked because you fasted overnight. The next morning when you went in, they drew your blood to make sure you weren't fibbing them, because people do that all the time. And we injected you 30 cc's of radioisotope labeled glucose, and all we do is track where the glucose goes. That's exactly what you're doing with your kid. Same thing. Is you're using the exact same principle in the body. The child has worked hard. Their muscles are crying for nutrition. That is the window that you have to supply them with antioxidants, protein, and a carbohydrate in that itty bitty little window. So that protein drink should consist of about 5 grams of glutamine on top of the protein. I'm giving you a recipe. All you guys are writing. 5 grams of glutamine. You want your protein by whatever weight they are. That in there. You want to have an insulin spike. That could be a date. A date has a glycemic index of over 100. They chew one dried date, it spikes their insulin well enough, they don't need any sugar in the drink whatsoever. For the kid that's just not going to drink pretty much anything other than a Gatorade, and by golly, they love their Gatorade, you take the isopur, you drop it into Gatorade, you hand it to them.
The glutamine's not gonna spike anything, just the date?
Glutamine doesn't spike insulin. All glutamine does is enter into the muscles at that point and displace lactate production.
Right, okay.
When you have proper glutamine levels on board inside your person, the muscle cells are allowed to elongate as long as they possibly can and contract to a trapezoid.
So
And
the
then all people-
insulin's gonna respond to the date?
The insulin is produced in response to the date, which opens the window of the feeding cell, the muscles who are just moved, and 100% of that protein will be delivered to the muscles that were just worked.
Right, okay, thank you.
What's the glutamine again?
Glutamine is an amino acid that displaces lactate out of the muscle, and they need about 5 grams, and the level of glutamine inside your muscle determines the ability of the muscle fiber to store carbohydrates. Many of these kids that I get to talk to are carbohydrate addicted because they're so glutamine deficient that they cannot store enough carbohydrates within their muscles to ever recover from event to event to event to event. So the question about recovery, very often on muscle biopsy of these athletes, their glutamine is so deficient they're only carrying about 30 to 40% of the glutamine that they should in their muscles. When a person weighs 130 pounds, that means they're a 60-kilo person. A 60-kilo person requires a minimum of 30 grams of glutamine every day when they're under acute metabolic stress. If you're a vegetarian, you cannot get 30 grams of glutamine from your vegetarian diet. They would have to eat all day long, and to attain that level of amino acid from their diet is almost going to be impossible. And no, I'm not anti-vegetarianism. I'm explaining why they have to be dedicated to an appropriate diet if they're going to be a vegetarian.
So I'm sorry, I just need to hear that one more time. A glutamine deficient
A glutamine deficient person
person,
cannot store carbohydrates correctly within their musculature.
so they
Cannot.
crave the
They're going to bonk,
carbohydrates.
they're going to crave carbohydrates constantly, they're going to run out of steam in races, they're going to feel like the gorilla jumped on them in the last 10 meters. They have no ability to store enough carbohydrates in their muscles. When we go to an exercise class, those of you who enjoy exercise, and you go to some class, and all of a sudden, you're 15 minutes into the class, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And you're looking around the room to see if anyone else is going to die, because you don't want to die alone. And you're wondering if you're going to make it, and you don't want anyone to realize how out of shape you really are, so you're not trying not to say anything and look like you're going to die. I know firsthand, I've been there. And everyone else in the room was like 20 years older than me, and I was like going, geez, you know, you're so out of shape. Well, what happened is that I've been under too much stress. And that means that I'm low in my glutamine, and I have not been storing carbohydrates within my brain, and your blood only contains 10 to 15 minutes worth of sugar. And when that's gone, it's gone. Now, when you get your second wind, that's because your liver goes, "Bleh," and it barfs out whatever's available. Because it finally gives up the ghost. Because it realized you're not going to stop exercise. So it releases its sugar. So you can go a little bit further, but it's your muscles which are the key. If you don't have proper glutamine stores within your musculature, which you could eat all day long, if your glutamine's missing, you can't store the carbohydrates in your muscles. So again, the formula is you take the weight of your child, multiply it by 0.454, that turns them into kilos. Then you take that number, multiply it by 0.5, and that's the number of grams of glutamine lost in acute metabolic stress. Now, all of your swimmers are not in acute metabolic stress, they're in chronic metabolic stress, which the loss rate's even worse. But the studies on this mechanism were all done in acute metabolic stress, where the athletes were put in, so if the kid weighs 60 kilos, which is 130 pounds, using the math, then that means that child needs 30 grams of glutamine per day.
So half a kilo per day.
And what
So
is it
30
again? I
grams
missed
or-
something. Is that the protein or is that?
It's an amino acid found in all proteins.
Okay, okay.
And the problem is that to get enough into your child means that you have to take advantage of all this timing mechanism. Because the muscle fibers will shut down. Absolutely, for sure, they're gonna shut down. I get 15 minutes post this, it's the gazelle effect. The gazelle doesn't keep running forever after the line poops out. It only runs a short distance, stops, and immediately starts eating. Because if it does not start consuming, it's not gonna displace the lactate within its muscles. Which means lactate is a recyclable fuel, but it's very inefficient. And that means that swimmer is going to be slow. And if you're the slowest gazelle in your herd, you are.
That's why they start
Are you familiar with CarboPro and?
Correct. And so
Okay.
many of those drinks already take this into account.
It does?
Many of
CarboPro?
them do, yes ma'am,
Okay.
on purpose. Because they're designed, like some of the Hammer products, those products, one of my favorites would be Cytomax for this age group, because it tastes halfway decent to them, and they kind of like it, and that one takes it into account. The EFX products, which now have passed muster for safe products, i.e. they've all EFX.
Where do you get these products?
GNC.
GNC carries a lot of these, but you have to be really careful on what athlete-safe products. So I'm trying to give you names that have been
There is
They have
the,
vetted
Cyto-
as being
I think they
athlete
carry
safe.
Cytomax
so
at
if there is the
Costco.
ready one, like protein muscles or the other kind, is it good for them or no?
Well, no, it's not the best, but I'm giving you what would be the easiest and the best, but the idea is you still have to get it in them. And if we're concerned about food colorings and additives, then, I mean, this is Austin, I know, but we're also having to be practical. And the first aspect is, can I even get it in the person? You know, making it from broccoli and kale and a bunch of other things, and a green drink, which I've done, because I have athletes that, when I come and stay with good old Uncle Dwayne, you know, and they stay at my place, and, you know, and I make all their food. I mean, this is what I did for a living for a long time. And it doesn't matter how nutritious it is, if it's still sitting on the counter, because they leave at 4:30. If it's still sitting on the counter, when I walk out there and mosey out there late, like at 5:30 in the morning, then it didn't do any good. Because they still went to swim and it's sitting there. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think of chocolate milk? after?
It's fine, chocolate milk, if the person digests it and all that stuff. And no, milk doesn't cause mucus and mucositis in people or cause their tummies to get sick unless you're allergic to dairy, you shouldn't be eating it. You know, the lady who came to see me, she was wearing a bandana. And I said, well, Miss Smith, why are you here to see me? And she goes, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't understand. She goes, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying. And she pulls her bandana down, and her lips are like this big around, and they're just hanging down, they're purple. And she goes, every time I eat tomatoes, this happens. So, if you have an athlete and they tell you, Mom, every time I drink milk, I have one-step disease. I got one step to get to the John. If I don't make it, I like fill my pants. It's called don't feed milk anymore. I mean, you know, or they're constipated, right? That person's not digesting this and it's ending up in their bowel and they're just pooping it out.
There's plenty of glutamate in chocolate milk.
Glutamine.
Glutamine.
Chocolate milk has about, almost all animal-based proteins, that's an animal-based protein, is gonna contain about 4 grams and per 20 grams of protein. More math for you guys. An athlete has to have 8 grams if they weigh 150 pounds to replete the carbohydrate stores within their muscles, not to have carbohydrate exhaustion, where they've exhausted their carbohydrate stores during practice, which is the average athlete. Now, there are products out there in the market where you can make them a sugar drink that they drink during their practice, which helps keep their carbohydrate stores going. And those are applicable, and they're out there. And they have to take one slug every 10 to 15 minutes. At the beginning, it's 10 minutes. Remember that 10-minute window I was talking about? Then thereafter, they would take one slug about every 15 to 20 minutes. And a slug, I'm talking about a mouthful. They don't sit there and guzzle it. The kid that's guzzling Gatorade at practice, no. I'm talking about buying one of the drinks that's specific to these type of sugars. And a good product like